Premiers and I have developed a framework that includes real and concrete measures to build a strong, clean economy.
Okay, this deal starts by setting the minimum price of carbon at $10 a ton across the country. That will rise to $30 in 2020 and $50 a ton by 2030. An independent expert panel will also look at how the plan is going and make recommendations. For more analysis, we've reached Elizabeth May. She's the leader of the Green Party, and she joins me from Sydney, British Columbia. Elizabeth May, what's your reaction to this deal?
Well, it's terribly important that we have a pan-Canadian climate price, a carbon price, and actions. I mean, the statement from the premiers and the Prime Minister has mostly garnered media attention on the issue of the carbon price. But there are other measures in here, including working on our building codes to make sure our buildings are more energy efficient as they're built. That saves us money long term and protects us against the increased extreme weather events that we're going to be experiencing. I mean, the reality of this issue is we're not doing nearly enough yet, but this agreement from the Prime Minister and most premiers is clearly a step forward.
Okay. What about the idea that there can be a mixture of cap and trade and carbon pricing across the country? I just talked to Dr. James Hansen, who's referred to as the father of climate change awareness in the world. And he said cap and trade, that's really just a gimmick. What you need is a carbon price in which the money goes back directly to the people.
Yeah, actually, the Green Party of Canada is the only party that actually agrees with the approach to carbon pricing that Dr. Hansen has championed, which is called carbon fee and dividend. So what you're basically doing is you're taking your taxes and your burden off income and profits that you want, and you're putting it on pollution that you don't want. And fee and dividend, you collect the carbon price and return it directly to each individual. Now, British Columbia's carbon tax was structured originally by the previous government under Gordon Campbell, same party, but boy, did it make a difference when Christy Clark took over, because she has not followed through on Gordon Campbell's plan, which was that our carbon price would steadily increase. But as that increases, our personal taxes have gone down. So British Columbia's economy did very well when the tax was first brought in. And we are now, as a province, not going to meet our carbon targets because Premier Clark has departed from the original plan. So there's lots of ways that you can price carbon. It's not impossible to have cap and trade work. But there are obstacles, just as Dr. Hansen identified.
Let's talk about the cost to people, because I was talking with Elmer Kim, a member of our business panel. He said natural gas, people who use natural gas will feel it the most. Will also feel it at the pump, somewhere between 5 and 15 cents a liter. How much is $50? What's that going to look like to the average person in their bill? Is it going to be about, as Dr. Hansen said, about $500 a year for everyone?
It depends on how it's structured in which province and how it, in British Columbia, we're paying $30 a ton right now, and it's invisible to us because we get back every penny collected at the pump on greenhouse gas charges comes back as reduced taxes. So it's really, the irony of it is that I don't think Gordon Campbell would have won his re-election if he hadn't brought in a carbon tax that was well designed. British Columbians did well with it. Our economy did well under it. Our economy grew with it. And I think Christy Clark's current reluctance to continue on that path is really, disappointing doesn't begin to express how much of a betrayal it is. But what it means is that she's looking at the next spring election using politics so she can attack the NDP and the Greens as parties that want to see us fulfill this continued increase in the carbon tax, which goes along with reductions in our personal income taxes. So it's apples and oranges if you say, well, you're going to be paying more if you don't include, oh, yes, and you're going to be getting a tax rebate as well.
Right. So you think it'll undermine support and people might actually not, it might undermine support for the very program itself.
It's possible. I mean, it depends on, Kathleen Wynne and Philippe Couillard, Ontario and Quebec, have gone with the cap and trade program. working with the large market of California, which has the same population as Canada. So their system may or may not work. A carbon price, carbon fee and dividend is the most straightforward. There's no room for having any kind of game playing around who gets auctioned credit and who's selling their pollution credits for more and who's getting a deal. But the important thing is the premiers have started on the path of carbon pricing. That part should be supported. What really is worrying to me, Carol, is that we're not talking about the cost of doing nothing. And Canada has been a laggard in the world the last 10 years. We haven't been fulfilling our domestic targets. Our own domestic target is still the one that Stephen Harper chose, and it's far too weak to meet our Paris commitments. And I think we do need to talk about, and Brad Wall needs Saskatchewan residents and farmers to say, do you want us to continue to have increasingly dramatic weather shifts, deluge rain events, droughts? It hurts the economy of every part of Canada if we ignore climate change.
Let me play for you what Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall had to say about why he couldn't sign on to this agreement.
A carbon tax is going to disproportionately hurt those sectors, and all of those, save agriculture, are under stress right now. There's about 3,000 jobs that have been lost in the energy sector alone in our province. There's been layoffs in the mining sector, and my point has always been, notwithstanding the fact that Saskatchewan has a framework in place for an emitters levy at some point down the road, my position has always been, now is not the time. 2018 is not the time for a tax that, by definition, will disproportionately impact industries that create jobs in our province, that sustain jobs in our province, that provide a tax base so that we can build hospitals and schools and pave highways.
What do you say to Brad Wall, Elizabeth May?
Unfortunately, Carol, we had a technological glitch, so I didn't hear what he actually said. So forgive me if this seems out of sequence. But I think to Brad Wall, to Premier Palliser, and to most of the federal Conservatives, I leave out Michael Chong, who's running for leadership and actually is championing a carbon price for the Conservatives. But this is not a partisan issue. And we really do need to recognize the threat of inaction. If we don't play a strong role as a nation, most of our trading partners around the world are enacting carbon prices, are moving forward on the Paris Agreement. We will need border adjustment taxes to make sure that goods coming into Canada don't undermine our own products that are being produced with a carbon price. But the plan that has just been approved by the premiers and Justin Trudeau and the federal government is a good one, but I have to say, it's not nearly strong enough. So those who would say we shouldn't take this step need to go back and talk to, well, they could go to the universities in their own provinces, they could go to any scientists and check the reality that we are up against it now, and global action on climate needs to be much more forceful and clear to move away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible, or literally, we're talking, I mean, the stakes are so high, it's hard to describe them without sounding as if you're exaggerating. But really, human civilization itself is at risk now from decades of procrastination by governments around the world. This is a commitment we can't afford to ignore, and we can't just say we've done enough now and carbon pricing does it for us. We have to move forward on all fronts to move as quickly as possible to a more prosperous economy that's relying on clean energy.
Let me ask you for specifics here on two fronts. One is, what will the world look like if we don't move on this? If we were to follow Brad Wall's path and say, okay, we're going to give industry a break, what would Canada look like? Let's say, I don't know, pick a time frame. Well,
it's all about what happens globally. It's obviously one of those issues, like protecting the planet from destruction of the ozone layer. Canada played a lead in that, and
but just give me an example of the difficulty we would face.
Well, the loss of human civilization is not a far-fetched threat, and it's not many generations from us. If we go above 2 degrees global average temperature increase, if we go to 3 degrees or 4 degrees, we don't know where the tipping points in the atmosphere are, where we will have unleashed self-accelerating global warming. The threat of millions of environmental refugees, both running and leaving places that have gone underwater from sea level rise, or where you simply can't grow food anymore. So political destabilization is a huge threat. For Canada, we will lose, we are a coastal nation. We are on 3 oceans. And if we lose, for instance, the Greenland ice sheet or in the Western Antarctic ice sheet, either one of those events leads to 8-meter sea level rise. So the impact
Which means communities
for Canada,
get wiped out.
well, we're talking every major coastal city on the planet is at risk. So ignoring the climate crisis isn't an option. Okay. Taking it on as a full court press, unleashing the ingenuity of our industries, of our corporate sector, municipal governments in Canada have been on board for a long time, and actually saying to all Canadians, this is something we can do together. We will be moving away from dependency on fossil fuels while we embrace the other opportunities we have in wind and solar and tidal and geothermal and increased ramped up energy efficiency, which is the cheapest and most available course for us. There's a lot that is actually good news. But
let me ask, I just need to, because we're under a time constraint here,
yes.
so I apologize for interrupting. When you say not far enough, and I need a fairly concise answer on this, how much further do you think this agreement should have gone?
Well, the Paris Agreement says that the world will, and Canada led in the negotiations and championed this position, that we should strive to avoid 1.5 degrees global average temperature increase. That means we leave a lot of fossil fuels in the ground. That means that we're on a carbon budget, and we can't decide that we're going to avoid global catastrophe caused by increased greenhouse gas emissions, and at the same time increase our own greenhouse gas emissions. It's about the math. We're on a carbon budget. We need to strive to meet the Paris targets, which means much more rapid phasing out of coal-fired electricity, much more rapid uptake of energy efficiency measures, and a carbon price that's more meaningful but gets delivered immediately back to individual Canadians, so that their ability to say, I've got more discretionary income, I'm going to use that to take advantage of this other government program that lets me re-insulate my house. And this is the way we need to think about using a whole range of measures that will actually make Canadians better off. But the target has to be meaningful.
What
and
does it
people
matter
who want
if
to
the
drag
United
us
States?
backwards
What if the United States, Matt? What if the United States has said it's pulling out of Paris? What does it matter what we do if they decide that they're not going to engage in any of these measures?
Well, the United States is more than the President of the United States. President-elect Donald Trump has apparently now withdrawn his threat to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. There are signs that he may listen to people on the climate science front. But bear in mind, the state of California has said it absolutely will continue with its efforts to go off fossil fuels. The New England states already have a trading regime to reduce coal in their electricity sector. Oregon and Washington are doing very progressive things. So is Idaho. I can mention state after state. The United States is not going to move off climate action no matter what Donald Trump thinks. He will certainly make it worse. He can delay things, but our job as a country and a neighbor is, as Mexico is saying, is we're sticking with our climate targets, and the U.S. needs to do its fair share.
Well, we'll see what happens, especially since he put a climate denier in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency. Elizabeth May, leader of the Green Party, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Carol.